everybody. My name is Katy Drazba. I'm a genetic counselor, mostly in the Florence office. However, you can kind of see me all over the place, and I travel a lot. So I do know a lot of you, but it's nice to. I feel like Lita kind of threw me into the deep end. This is my first presentation where we're really talking in front of everybody I teach. So a few quick disclaimers before we kind of dive into things. Spoiler alert: we are not going to code what mortality and longevity in this presentation. As it turns out, these are really complicated subjects, and as I kind of dived into the literature about these two things, I feel like just more and more questions came up. So I am not an expert about this, and I think this kind of begs the question that we should have more dialogue about it as well. Secondly, I also highlight some direct-to-consumer companies and other research centers. I just want to make it clear that I do not support or endorse any of these, just to make that clear. They're just examples. And then finally, we're going to maybe bring up some emotional stuff, and if anybody either here or in any of these satellite offices just, I don't know what's going on in everybody's lives at this point in time. If you just don't feel like you're emotionally want to talk about this right now, I will not be offended if anybody just feels like they need to. All right, so just wanted to give a quick timeline of my personal and professional accomplishment, since I don't know a lot of you very well. And it serves two purposes. So this is kind of a weird topic, and I just wanted to highlight I was born in Berkeley, so I'm not sure if anybody knows about Berkeley, but I don't feel like I had any chance of really being normal. And then second, so we're all going to die. I'm going to die. Hopefully I get to do a lot of really cool things. I have a lot of things left to do on my to-do list, but it's all going to happen for everybody. I haven't really thought about my own mortality in a really long time. The first time that I remember actually being when I was watching Leo tragically die in Romeo and Juliet back in 1996 when I was a preteen. I had an episode of what the experts called mortality salience, meaning like a deep awareness that you eventually will die. So I'm not sure why this movie sparked that, but I remember having this like super deep, intense like paralysis almost, of despair and sadness. So it was a very dark thought, and I'm not sure. Keep going. What? You just keep talking. Oh. It's all right.
Sarah, can you not see them?
Oh, she can.
We're good. We're good.
All right. So needless to say, some dark thoughts kind of came into my mind. And when you're a preteen, basically the only response is pushing those very dark and deep into your brain, and hopefully never thinking about them again for a really long time. Well, somewhat selfishly, I decided that a long time is now, and with all of you. So in one of the books that I read called How I Died by a man named Sherwin Nuland, he wrote an epilogue. I have written this book for myself as much for everybody else. And I feel pretty much the same way about this presentation. It finally forced me to kind of confront my own personal issues as well as delve into the research to help me better educate myself. Death is a universal experience. In American culture, at least, we have this cultural denial. We have no problem dealing with death in like an abstract form or from like a very far emotional distance. But we have a really hard time talking about this with the people that we love, and also with our colleagues. I feel like there are some people that are better about this than most. I've had, some feelings every time Dr. Rogers comes to the microphone, because I feel like he's going to make me cry almost every time now.
Yeah, my patient.
But this is, not just a problem with me. It's not a problem with us. It's with society as a whole. I think that these conversations are just really hard to have. And really the biggest hurdle that we all face is just getting it out there in the open and having honest conversations about this. And really, once we get over that hurdle, that allows for more constructive dialogue and sharing of ideas. The bottom line is really to help our patients, give compassionate care. And I think we can all do a lot better in terms of providing compassionate care, in terms of dealing with issues of, life and death. All right, so this is a kind of a skeleton outline of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm really just scratching the surface of a lot of these issues, and some of these subtopics could actually be their own case review. There's a lot of research about all of these. And we're definitely, going to talk about the sad stuff first to get that over with. So also, why did this topic even come up in the first place? It's probably a question that you might all be wondering. First of all, why not? I think we should talk about it. But there's kind of like 3 reasons or like areas of my life where this kind of made me feel like this is an important topic to talk about. And I just wanted to explain how it all materialized in the first place. So the first off being professional reasons. As some of you may know, I had a whole different career in public health before coming into genetic counseling and genetics. And in public health, mortality is just an outcome measure. We talk about it as, odds ratios, bar graphs, heat maps. Death is not personal. I never had to look somebody in the face, of somebody who was dying. It was all just numbers and Excel spreadsheets. So, that was a very comfortable place for me to be in. Ignorance was bliss back then. But then I got into genetic counseling and started here at GGC 2 years ago because I wanted to work with people. Death suddenly wasn't abstract anymore. I talked with kids who've had near-death experiences, and I've literally had to sit across the table from somebody where death was winning a battle, and so that was really hard. These are some kind of direct quotes from patients, but kind of experiences that I have had, real ones in the clinic. I had an appointment with a man a couple months ago who was recently diagnosed with cancer for the 4th time, and he has decided to go to respite care. His quotes are the ones in blue. I had some really awkward moments during my conversations with him where I felt like this. I didn't make that face, but that is how I felt inside. I love this little girl. But I was just like, what am I doing? I didn't really know the right way to respond to some of the things he said. Somehow I graduated my training program for genetic counseling. We talked a lot kind of around death, like pregnancy termination, bereavement, but we never had a class about how to talk to people about death. And so, like with that second statement about the milkshake, that's pretty funny. I laughed with him. But I spent the whole 85-mile drive back from Columbia to Florence to Columbia, mortified, not sure if that was the right thing to have done. Was laugh at that comment with him. So no good employee ever wants to ever admit that they feel, unprepared or helpless, or even ignorant in some ways. And I hope, Dr. Lyons would fire me for admitting this. But those are real feelings that I felt, and I don't think I'm alone in feeling these feelings sometimes, which is why I wanted to bring them up. And really, these feelings were really bothering me in terms of feeling, unprepared and ignorant. And in order to kind of redeem myself, I kind of went on a journey of educating myself, and also the next step was to open the conversation, publicly. I also had some personal reasons for bringing this up, because I know feeling unprepared professionally is kind of inextricably intertwined with my personal avoidance of thinking about these issues. Remember, I pushed my deep dark thoughts after Romeo and Juliet far down in my brain, and I did not want to think about them again. And I'm really questioning if it's even possible to have these conversations professionally without kind of wrestling with them on a personal level. So my Uncle Steve died about a year ago. It was very sudden. He's only a year older than my parents, who are not even 60 yet. And his death was, public because my cousin is actually a professional tennis player. I'm not bringing this up because I want to brag about him, although he is awesome and a really nice kid and deserves success. I'm bringing this up because his grief was very public. Every time I watched him on TV, they brought it up, especially at the end if you want a match, sometimes he would break down. And I've been really inspired, reading about Stevie and watching him because he has publicly admitted, the challenges of talking about healing, and also, disclosing publicly that he has sought mental health counseling services to cope with his grief. So, his experience, I'm 2,000 miles away, I don't get to talk to him a lot, but it kind of made me think that it is really our responsibility, to kind of chip away at these personal issues that we have, to break down barriers not only for our patients, but for society as a whole. And then also, death is all around us. It's pretty much ubiquitous in today's culture. Sometimes it's controversial. Sometimes it's been sensationalized by the media. Sometimes what I've seen and heard has actually made me really stop and think about, what the meaning of death is, and then also, obviously, what the meaning of life is and what the purpose of all of this is about. So here's something for you all to ponder for just a moment. So even though we're surrounded by death, we joke about it, see it on TV, we're reading about it all the time. Why is it so hard for us to have honest conversations about this, with the people we love and, as medical professionals? So people do have interesting theories about this, but I'm not going to go through them because I think it's better for us to try and answer this question for ourselves, because once we come to an answer, I think that actually reveals a lot about what our own personal issues are about thinking about death and life and death issues. All right, so now that we covered kind of how this all came to be, we'll delve into a little bit about the science and psychology of mortality first. So on a side note, I watched Steel Magnolias for the first time, not knowing what it was about a month ago. My friend invited me to go see it with her mom on Mother's Day. And wow, I have not ugly cried like that. It was 30 minutes, downpour. So death, like in stories and media and songs and art and culture, it's not all bad. And I would argue that this is actually a really good example of, a fictional story that really touches upon kind of the personal element, especially of grief. I don't know if I've ever seen anything ever that felt as real as Sally Field's breakdown in the cemetery was. It just was very poignant, I think, and I really appreciate that there are, artists out there, even if we can't talk about it, bringing this up even in a fictional way to bring up actually the real issues. All right, so I can't ever get rid of my public health degree, mostly because I still have a lot of student loans. Okay, so I will talk about it until the loans are paid. So just kind of some background about mortality. So this is CDC data, and the most recent we have is for 2015. So these charts did not come up well, and I couldn't copy paste, in a way that was very visible. So the first two things, or the most, common way for people to die, are heart disease and cancer, and these are just the top 10. And then we also know, in terms of infant mortality, the top, or the most common reason for infant mortality is congenital malformation. I was reading an interesting article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple years ago that said that there is in terms of premature death, there's actually a 30% piece of the pie that has a genetic predisposition. We do know that there is genetics involved in the top 9 out of the top 10 causes of death. Hannah and Julie and I always talk about, hereditary predisposition for cancer, about 5 to 10%. We know Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, even mental health issues on here as well do have a genetic predisposition. We also know that in terms of Congenital malformations, we do know genetic conditions that do have congenital malformations, but we still have a lot to learn about these as well, especially with things that are multifactorial, like neural defects. Sorry, I have one more thing to say about it. So in terms of our piece of the pie, so we're 30%, probably less than that is actually like Mendelian disorders and actually things that come walking through the clinic. So even though we have kind of a small piece of the pie, I think we have a really important job in improving the health of the American people. The rest of these pieces of the pie, these are public health interventions that work on like institutional levels. We are talking about people and families on a personal level. So I think, in terms of thinking about death and dying and improving the health of American people, we still have kind of a ways to go in improving our own services and how that improve care overall. So this is actually just a list of things that I had seen that have somehow sparked some sort of conversation about death. It's not always the same conversation. I think other people who have been in genetics for a much longer time probably have a much longer list. It's not surprising. I don't think it's that surprising that, life and death issues even came up with any of these conditions. However, I think we need to be prepared for when we're not really expecting death conversation. Sometimes you're seeing a kid with speech delay, that's a DDSN referral, and 20 minutes in the appointment, you're passing around the tissue box because grandma just died. So, sometimes things like that happen, and when you're unprepared for it, mentally or even just like educationally, it makes these appointments harder and a little bit more awkward. So also in terms of genetics, there's been some attention recently with telomeres. So telomeres, for the people who are not scientists in the room, are basically like caps at the ends of the chromosome. We lose a little bit of genetic material each time a cell divides, and these telomeres are kind of the protectors of it. It's been described as like those little plastic things at the end of the shoelace to make sure that your shoelaces aren't fraying. So they have been, studied, and they're being studied more often now in terms of their association with cell death, like molecular cell death and aging. So there is a lot of research about that, and I'm not even going to go into it at this point in time. And right now, based on the available evidence, there's some people that wrote full books about how they think, lengthening the telomeres is going to let us be immortal someday. If anybody's read these books, I'd be really interested to know what these authors' arguments are. But it seems like there's a lot of hype around these telomeres and figuring out how to lengthen them in order to give us a longer lifespan. So there is telomere testing. I don't know if anybody has seen these ads. I feel like my Google definitely tracks me. So these come up for me all the time. So you can actually get your telomere length measured through genetic or direct-to-consumer companies. I'm not really sure. I'm very skeptical. They have a lot of science on their website, but however, I'm not sure really how the results are actionable, in the sense that we do know what causes telomeres to shorten in some ways, which are bad diet, not exercising, and high stress level and other environmental factors. And we already know what to do about those things. Jump on the treadmill, eat a healthier diet, eat diet in moderation, don't smoke, engage in general healthy behaviors. So I don't really understand the clinical utility of this. If you're doing it for fun, that's fine. But really, I think at this point in time, this is my perspective, I feel like it's kind of a gimmick to sell these $600 bottles of supplemental, herbal supplements to enhance your telomerase activity. So, it's a lot cheaper to just go outside and exercise and buy fruits and vegetables, I think. All right, so before we segue into the sad section, I wanted to just, and this second quote right here is intentionally controversial unless, in case any of the doctors were starting to fall asleep. That makes the blood boil, who knows? From all the books I've read that were written by health professionals, most of them agree that we are personally responsible for creating the cultural denial about death, as well as keeping it going, essentially. So medicine, as we know, was different, I think, several decades ago. It was okay to hide things from patients, especially if they felt, if the doctor felt people weren't emotionally ready to handle the information. But now with so many medical advances, I think the reason for denial is perhaps changing in the sense that denial may stem from false hopes about treatment, a never-ending quest for a cure, or even thinking that death is not a natural cause, but actually the failure of medicine. So at this point in time, we are all consumers and providers of modern day healthcare, and we're kind of amidst this evolution or revolution, whatever you want to call it, that's transitioning to a more patient-centered and empowerment approach. I think it would behoove us to become more prepared to have conversations, what this author calls the difficult conversation, because I think as patients become more empowered, they're going to be initiating these conversations more, and I think it would be helpful for us to, open the dialogue, educate ourselves a little bit better about the best way to have these conversations and the right questions to ask. All right, so in terms of factors that, so this slide serves actually dual purposes. It is the factors that go into an individual's perception of death and thoughts about their mortality salient. These are also the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of when we're having conversations with parents, where they're coming from, what their background is. Somebody that, in terms of demographics, when you're talking to a child versus an adult, the conversation is probably going to be very different. In terms of the timing of, learning about somebody's impending death, is it something that's been, grandma's been dying for 4 months, or is it the child just found they had a terrible disorder on newborn screen? Cause and circumstance, how prepared somebody is for these type of news, and even how prepared they are to have, wrestle with this on a personal level themselves. Obviously, beliefs and perceptions play a role in people's thoughts about death and dying. This includes, religious and spiritual or non-spiritual perceptions. Cultural traditions and beliefs also play a role as well. American culture is different. Even within American culture, there are subcultures that treat life and death as very different issues, and have very different beliefs, rituals, and customs that go along with it, and even perceptions about death. It's not scary for everybody in every culture. Also, past experiences can play a role in somebody's thought perceptions about death as well. If they've had somebody tragically die versus in their life, that may influence their own thoughts about death as well. I think it's important for us to, this is not an exhaustive list by any means about things that we need to be thinking about, and also what goes into people's thoughts about death, but I think these are just a good place to start, at least, to kind of delve into people's backgrounds, and what may be influencing, so again, that we can have better conversations with our patients. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, a how-to list to talk about death and dying with people, and even grief and sadness. There's books upon books about that in multiple fields. I went to the library, and the lady took me to 5 different sections to encounter books about talking about death and dying. In the self-help section, in the science section, even in the autobiographical section. Palliative care has its own section as well. So this is really just a list of kind of the common things that I kept seeing over and over again as I was going through all the literature. One thing that I found was surprising, and not all of these are really that surprising, is that sometimes patients actually expect you to initiate the conversation, as in authoritative, expert field. So sometimes people actually don't want to talk about it until you want to talk about it, which is, at that point in time, we have to just put aside our view, especially if the patient is throwing out what they call tester things, throwing out little things that make it seem like they're then ready to talk about it, but they still may want you to initiate the conversation. And I think the biggest thing is to listen. I don't think, one of the most common complaints that I was reading about in terms of the patient perspective is that they did not feel listened to. I know we're all busy. I know we're all trying to, multiple patients a day, but just taking the time, especially if somebody is in a situation where they're dealing with grief or loss or, dying, I think it is in the patient's best interest, and I think it's in, the spirit of the improving healthcare best interest to sit down and actually listen to people about what they're saying and what their hopes, goals, what their plans are, things like that. There's so much literature on this. This is like a very, very brief list, and if anybody needs more research looking at any of these, I'd be happy to help pass those off. So we also want to find out what they actually know, acknowledge their needs both emotionally and physically, and that goes along with minimize feelings of pain, both emotionally and physically. People really appreciate being honest and candid. Nobody at this point in time wants their doctor to lie to them or kind of skirt around issues. Promote respect and dignity. I think that goes without saying. And so before I did all this research, my motto is, even if you don't know what you're talking about or feeling super awkward, just be nice. I think, that is the goal of us in general, to provide compassionate care. But I think treating our patients with kindness and empathy are a very important thing. I also was thankful in that I learned that it is okay to use humor in these appointments, but you really want to mirror, what is shown by your patients. If they seem to be okay with it, I think it's okay for us to as well. And not being afraid of silence as well is a big deal. Helping people plan, prepare, and meet their goals are also really important, especially if this is a kind of untimely situation that was unexpected. With young people, like, I don't have a will yet. I don't know if any other people, like, I wouldn't even know what to do if I, at this point in time, so figuring out, have they even talked about these and even made some sort of logistical plan. And also, like with genetic counselors, we're trained to do more acute counseling. We are not counselors. So being aware of what referral resources are out there, even with like palliative care, bereavement resources, things like that. And don't be afraid to make a referral to somebody that could help people on a deeper level if necessary. And then also, we see patients, but we also see families. So keeping in mind that there are people involved with the patient's life that also need to be cared for, and there are lots of resources out there for caregivers as well. So not forgetting about them is important as well. And then also keeping in mind special circumstances, things like talking about death with somebody with dementia is not going to be the same conversation as somebody that does not have that. Talking about with a family whose newborn was just had a diagnosis is not the same conversation, as well as with individuals with intellectual disability. Keeping things much more simple is what is recommended in terms of talking about these issues as well. So keeping in mind that there are other factors involved in these conversations as well. All right, I feel like I would be remiss in kind of skipping over Elizabeth Ross's 5 stages of grief, since we are talking about death and dying. However, I want to just point out that we have come a long way even since then, and she even wrote a book after this that goes into this a little bit more. There are lots of feelings that go into the stages of grief. I don't know if there's really just 5. And so there is tons of literature out there that goes into, the deeper psychology of this, as well as even taking a whole different approach to the conversations of death and dying and people's feelings about grief. I kind of flipped through one book that was about death as a positive, transformative experience. And that's a whole different approach about talking about death and dying than it is, these like very chronological stages of grief. These are good books, but I think they're a good start in terms of thinking about how people, the psychology behind dealing with grief and loss. All right, so these pictures will make sense in a minute. But in public health, we always say, okay, so what's the call to action? What are the action points? We can talk about this as much as we want, but how do we change things? So one of the things that the experts who wrote all of these books say, if you're having trouble initiating conversations about, grief, loss, death and dying, just start talking about it with your partner or somebody that you love and trust. And I just wanted to, not throw my husband under the bus, but say that sometimes I think it is a good idea to talk about this, at least at first, with somebody you love and trust, just in case you laugh in their face about what their answer is, which is what happened to me. So my husband, Mark, so he's very smart, but when we were having a conversation about death and dying, what we want to happen to our bodies after we die, he knows I want a very eco-friendly burial and, to go back to the earth. Well, he told me that he wants me to figure out a way to cryogenically freeze his brain so then he could be put into a body or robot when the time comes. So that, I wouldn't even say that. But it reminded me of one of my favorite shows, which is Futurama, where they just keep people at their head jars, essentially, in this big museum forever. So they are then immortal. So you never know what you'll learn, even talking to people that you love about these issues. All right, longevity. So we all want to live long and prosper, don't we? So how do we do it? And what do we know about it? So in terms of the current expected lifespan, again, going back to our public health, our average lifespan is a little, on average, is a little less than 79 years of age. Back in 1900, it was actually only 47 years old, which is kind of crazy to think about. And, thank you, public health. There are gender-related and ethnicity-related different averages to death as well. And at this point in time, the oldest living person is only 122 years old. And she was a French woman who has passed away. But how do we get past 122? Like, is that really it? Is the telomere the key to lengthening our lifespan? We don't know quite yet. So in terms of what we do know about the genetics of longevity, it's actually a very complex phenotype influenced by genetics, our environment, our behaviors, and our lifestyle. We also do know that epigenetics plays a role, and that is, methylation acquired over time, turning on and off certain genes. So there are lots of people doing research about that. We do know that the age of death is moderately heritable, meaning that genetics only explains a quarter, or is only a quarter of the reason why somebody dies at the age that they do, which meaning that there is still 3/4 or 75% beyond genetics that plays a role in the age that somebody died. It does increase with age. So the oldest living people and their parents and grandparents, that they also have lived longer, there's more likely to be a genetic component to that. There have been a bunch of GWAS, so genome-wide association study, as well as linkage studies within and across populations. An interesting thing is that centurions, so people that live over 100, do actually not have, or they do not have less risk alleles for common diseases like obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, than the average person walking down the street. So we do know that, however, there are genetic factors, but what other environmental factors are these older living people also doing to increase their lifespan? So we need to answer that question. At this point in time, the most consistent positive associations are with the ApoE and FOX003. There's different isoforms of ApoE, so some of them are actually associated with longer lifespan, but we also know that there's one at least that we know is negatively associated with longevity and is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So I think that's kind of interesting. What are the different mechanisms of these isoforms to make one a positive association and one a negative? There's also hundreds of other candidate genes out there. There are a lot of GWAS studies about this, believe it or not. I was happy. I love Manhattan flax, which are down here. And so these are all listed in these GWAS studies. But really, there's no consistency to any of the genes that we really know besides these two genes, the most commonly reported as having positive association. There is ongoing research in multiple pathways, like the insulin IGF-1 pathway, immune response and inflammation, as well as gene related to telomere maintenance. So if nobody believed me when I said that the genetics of this is complex, this is a figure that was in one of the articles representing what we know about the genetics of aging in all these clusters. So I don't know how to make sense of this at all, but this is just a good example of how complex this all is, that we do know some genes related to aging and longevity, but there's so many more pathworks and networks that could be created. You can explore this a little bit more online if you really want to know more about this. So not surprisingly, there's also direct-to-consumer longevity testing. Some of these actually are looking at your telomere length, so a little bit of confusion about that. So my husband is a consultant for a direct-to-consumer, none of which are these, and he said basically people are looking at the single nucleotide polymorphisms basically found in GWAS to basically create a longevity score, which is very subjective. So I've been told to kind of give you a score essentially is what your results are. Again, I don't think this is really clinically indicated again at all, especially when these companies are basically saying that your test results are medically actionable. Again, what do we need to do with our long life? Physical activity, maintain a healthy weight, don't smoke tobacco products. And again, we kind of come full circle with the social determinants of health, making sure that, not only our patients, but the general public have kind of their basic needs taken care of, which I'm glad we do talk about this with GG. It's not about the patient. We need to get them services as well. These are the things that we know at this point in time are increase people's lifespan, as also make a better quality of life for individuals as well.
You're applying this against marijuana.
Tobacco products. So what's on the horizon for the future for all of us as we're all sitting here aging? We're edging to like the crazy sci-fi stuff. But at this point in time, we need to learn a little bit more about the cellular processes and kind of at the molecular level, what is happening. So there are some very smart people out there doing this type of research, putting them in nice fancy diagrams for the rest of us people to understand. But you can't see on the thing, but these little things right there are question marks. So there is still, we still need to do a lot more research as well in terms of figuring out like what is actually happening to our body to make the aging and cell death process happen. During my research for this presentation as well, I came up with into a whole new field of what they call, biomedical gerontology and regenerative medicine. And talking about this could actually take up a whole, case review in and of itself. So these organizations are doing some kind of crazy sci-fi stuff. Not just thinking about how do we cure these medical issues, but how do we reverse, aging, and how do we rejuvenate our aging cells, things like that, through either like stem cell therapy, immune therapy, even gene therapy. So, there's tons of research out there about that. These are good places to start. And the STEMS Research Foundation, they fund research as well. If anybody thinks of an idea for us to get into. All right. So at this point in time, I wanted to share a poem that I really liked and will hopefully kind of end this talk on a positive and hopeful note. It was read at my neighbor's funeral a couple months ago, and I feel like it really resonated with me. And just some reflections. So we all come from different backgrounds, both professionally and personally. And I feel like we all have a lot of insights to share with each other about how to have open and honest conversations about, the difficult conversations, life issues, death issues, griefness, sadness, both inside and outside of the clinic. I also wanted to normalize the feelings of inadequacy and discomfort about talking about these things. I can't imagine I'm the only one that has felt this way. And I also want to help provide more resources. I don't know, our G and H drive, I haven't explored these fully in the 2 years I've been here. I don't know, do you like, do we have a folder for like grief resources? No, okay, well I think we should have one. And I feel like that would be important just in case anyone by either circumstance or just curiosity needs somewhere to go to look up more information. So on that note, does anybody have any questions, comments, or reflections?
Write some things down.
Do we need a tissue?
No. But death is more or less uncommon at any point in someone's life. Come to learn that. Patients want you to laugh. I've learned that. Don't be afraid. And I'm going to ask you a question. Would you want to live? How much sadness can the human heart take watching your loved ones die around you? I've been there. And I'll end on a note that we have an awesome supportive care team in Greenwood for our pediatric and prenatal patients. And I have been impressed that makes a dramatic difference in how those families deal with those issues that in their life, whether it be a pregnancy loss or whether it be their child. And I've sat in as a geneticist on some of those sessions. And I really do think that makes a difference for the family. And when I'm talking to a family, that issue comes up. I try to be honest. You never know what is keeping someone going. So I think many times they're hanging on to the thread of hope. And we need to not remove all of their hope, but we try to allow them to live a realistically optimistic state so that they can make it through. People have different times at which they'll go through those crucial loss stages. And some people never get through those stages. So I just think those are things we need to think.
Thanks. I knew you would have something to say. Nobody else did. And I think, you touch on good points, and I feel like, I actually use you as a role model. Because I feel like I get the sense that you were really present with the patient during these difficult conversations, even though it can be hard for us. It being hard for us isn't what's important. Being there for them and present with them is.
All of those things bring up memories that each of us have, things we've gone through. That's what makes it so difficult. is that we're reliving those sad times that we with the patient.
Yeah, and I think like with genetic counseling, we talk a lot about like countertransference. But in this case, like sometimes I feel like it's very easy to separate the personal and professional. In talking about like grief loss, I feel like it's a lot harder because I don't know how you talk about it unless your own feelings are somehow involved with it. So.
Part of being.
All right. Well, I also want to thank Hannah and Julia and my team out in Florence for not totally freaking out when I told them I was going to talk about that. And Julia actually sent me a whole list of resources, so thank you. The goal is really to just, not put the burden of talking about these things, not just on Dr. Rogers, but to just facilitate and kind of make this a normal conversation that we have in order to eventually, the goal is to improve care. Thanks, everyone.